Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in our fourth webinar across our series looking at higher education digital transformation. Last session, we looked at university partnerships across OPMs, boot camps, and MOOCs. But today, we're going to really double click into MOOCs, massive open online courses, getting a sense of how they've grown over time, where they're at right now, and where they're going. So really, really excited for this discussion. To take us through it, we have an amazing panel of experts. We're going to be hearing from Lucy Blakemore, who's leading the digital capability work here at Holland IQ. Hey, Lucy.
Morning.
Morning, good afternoon, where everyone is. Yeah. And we're also joined by our amazing co-CEOs, Maria Spies and Patrick Brothers.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So for some of you, you already know the gist. You've probably been to a few of these by now and you probably get it. But for those who are new to this session, this is a series across 2021, really hyper-focused on digital transformation in higher ed. Right now, we're doing a lot of deep dives, just setting the scene and getting a sense of different contours and components, looking at things from micro and alternative credentials, university partnerships. In a couple weeks, we're going to be looking at digital models and international HE. Then as we continue with this discussion, we're going to dig deep into perspectives of digital leaders and university case studies. So it's just going to be a really amazing and continually growing conversation throughout the year. Some very quick housekeeping. So all of these sessions are recorded. Everyone always wants to know if they'll get a recording, and yes, you will. Don't worry, never fear. Recordings will be sent to your inbox immediately after the session concludes, so have a look there. We also have a lot of really amazing ways to engage with the conversation. If you click on the right-hand side where the live storm is, you can see there's a chat where you can share feedback and reflections and just chat with the group. There's also a Q&A area that you can click into that gives anonymous questions that we can answer directly. And then we're also going to be taking polls throughout the session. There are hundreds of people on this call, so really want to get responses from as many of you for all of them as possible. So really excited for that. And for anybody who's not familiar with Holland IQ, welcome. Really great to see you here. We are the world's leader for global education intelligence. We drive decision, our data is supporting decisions for leaders in government, technology, academia, investment. We're really excited to see many of our clients on the call. So welcome, great to see you here. And we're really excited to connect. And just looking ahead to the agenda, really packed 45 minutes. So I'm going to jump off in a minute or hand it over. But we're going to start by really setting the scene, looking at the framework as a guiding kind of overview. Then we're going to look at evolution of MOOCs over time. Then we're going to zoom out and sort of contextualize and understand how this fits in with broader themes we've discussed. Then we're going to dive deep into the anatomies and archetypes. So what systems, what models, what structures are really driving this. Then we're going to think about risks and opportunities that are coming up online and should be aware of. So thanks. I'll hand it over to Lucy.
Thank you very much, Beth. Okay, just a brief cameo from me this morning, or afternoon and evening. For those of you who haven't joined these sessions before, this is the digital capability framework that's been underpinning pretty much everything we're looking at in higher education at the moment. And it's a framework that's built on the learner life cycle. So on the left, you can see what's called demand and discovery. That's right at the beginning, looking at product strategy, marketing processes, recruitment and enrollment, through into learning design, where we're looking at curriculum design, digital content, subject matter expertise and teaching strategies, shifting over into the campus, whether it's digital or face-to-face and learner experience with the green boxes, academic administration, learning experience, student life, and of course, assessment and verification. And then work and lifelong learning in the orange and yellow, where we're looking at work integrated learning, career planning, industry and business engagement, and of course, alumni and continuing education. And you can almost loop those orange boxes right back around to the pink boxes. It is a life cycle. A lot of what happens at that end also feeds back into product strategy and rethinking as people approach new models and new ways of doing things. Another way to read this framework is, of course, top to bottom as well, and there's increasing detail as you go down. So if you look broadly across all of those areas in an institution, then you might want to stay at the top, but equally you might have a learning design team that wants to go deep into some of those capability boxes and just look at things like learning delivery models or experiential learning approaches. So all of this is from an institutional point of view, thinking about how all of those different functions and areas and digital capabilities in a university might need to work together and understand what's happening across the whole life cycle to really support digital transformation. A framework is nothing without tools to go with it and things that really help you put it into action. And I have to say the last week has been one of the most interesting weeks, from hearing from people how they're looking at things like the self-assessments that go with the framework to understand how their institution is perceived to be performing and the potential impact of a lot of those digital capabilities on the future of digital transformation, how that kind of information can inform priorities and direction, and then ultimately, particularly for things like MOOCs and OPMs that we covered last time, what strategic decisions and digital choices then come out of that. So questions around buy, build, and partner, or whether you're looking at people, process, or technology, are all much better informed when you've got a framework, a holistic framework to be able to talk to people about internally. So for each time with each of our themes, we've been looking at which parts of the framework does it particularly feature. And it's really important that we're looking at this from an institutional perspective. So of course, there are lots and lots of people who provide MOOCs. There are lots of companies who do it in different ways. But the lens on this framework is, as an institution, if you are looking at partnering, using MOOCs, bringing them into digital transformation in some way, what are the digital capabilities that might come into the conversation? And I'm not going to go into detail on this, and we usually share a visual of this so you can kind of dig into it in a little bit more detail afterwards. But you'll notice if you kind of squint and look back, the demand and discovery and learning design are particularly well populated for MOOCs. And what you'll see later from Maria and Patrick are two aspects of MOOC in particular that look at content and look at distribution. And if you kind of put marketing and demand and discovery as a proxy for distribution, there's an awful lot of decisions and capabilities around how courses are going to reach people who need to take part in them. And then likewise, learning design. Learning design has been dominant actually in every theme that we've looked at. When people said last year was the year of the learning designer, they really weren't wrong. It's absolutely been crucial around a lot of digital transformation thinking. So you'll see a lot of those boxes are quite well populated as well. And a couple more comments. In learner experience, there may not be physical campuses involved, sometimes there may be, but usually a lot less focus on student life and community and volunteering and things like that. But still a lot of digital capability around assessment and verification, which has come an awful long way since, you know, have a look at your friend's assessment halfway around the world 10 years ago and tell us if you think it was okay, through to some much more sophisticated methods now. And then the final point to note, in work and lifelong learning over on the right-hand side, a deep slice of orange there in industry and business engagement. There's an awful lot going on between universities and businesses and industry and professional associations in this MOOC space. So that's how we're looking at it. And something a little different this time, a quiz of sorts rather than a poll. So if you go to the polls on the right, you'll be able to vote to estimate what you think is the total number of MOOC learners globally. So you've got option 1, 10 million, option 2, 50, option 3, 100, option 4, 500, and you can see what that equates to as people on Earth. So I'll give you a minute to have a go at that. Okay, I can see we've got the right audience in today. We are looking at, you're guessing between 100 million and 500 million, about 45%, 32%. Very few are going for 10 million. So you know this thing's big, and you're absolutely right. I don't know if, Pat, you want to come in at this point and tell them how right they are?
Well, I wish we knew. I mean, what we know is that, you know, the major MOOC platforms have between 10 and 100 million registered users. And unless they're all the same people registered on all of those platforms, it's going to add up to something it may well be close to 500 million. But when you see that 1 in 16 people on Earth thing, it's a bit of a check. That's a whole lot of people. But regardless, it is enormous. That's basically my takeaway. And I think it's really interesting just seeing where it's settling. 1/3 of people said 100 million. So they're, you know, like you said, we've got the right folks here on the call. All right, I might take over from there, Lucy. Perfect. Let's dive right in. Firstly, let's look at the evolution, kind of how we got here. So let's remind ourselves, like, education is enormous. You saw those numbers, somewhere between 100 and 500 million MOOC users around the world, and that's, you know, quite similar to the size of education. There's around $6 trillion, $5 to $6 trillion through COVID, spent by governments, by consumers, by companies around the world on education in total. We're seeing, as you may have seen, a change in that spend as well. Whilst there's strong underlying population growth, we see in the outlook higher education tuition deflation. We've seen higher education inflate at record levels, outstripping every other category around the world in the rate at which the cost of higher education is increasing. We think it's very unlikely that it will continue at that pace, and we may well see quite significant deflation in different markets around the world. Some of that is being driven by faster and cheaper credible alternatives. And we're going to look at that, and MOOCs are playing a role in that component as well. And then finally, digitization. COVID has seen an acceleration of digitization in education, and over time, not straight away, it will drive a lower cost base as well, and hopefully lower the cost, increase the access and the affordability of education globally. Let's double click down on post-secondary and workforce. Higher education is a word that is sometimes used to include vocational, sometimes used to include workforce, but that post-secondary market, which includes higher education and the vocational market, subject to which country you're in the world and what you call it in your system, is about $2.2 trillion and under tuition deflation pressure, most prominently in the US, but also in other more developed economies around the world. Workforce, just shy of $400 billion spent on workforce training around the world. Online degrees is a $36 billion market, and the alternative and micro-credentials is about a $10 billion market. And MOOCs are playing a role in every single one of these. On the 2.2 trillion, one of the most fascinating developments we've seen in the last 5 years is where MOOCs are being used as core blocks of traditional degrees, not online degrees. As we see, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of post-COVID, we will see traditional programs, as everyone goes back to campus post-COVID as well, will be increasingly hybrid, and what we used to call hybrid will just be the new normal. And so MOOCs are very significantly playing in each of these components, and we're going to drill into that. We won't retrace the detailed history of the MOOC. I think there's a MOOC on that as well. But basically, to recap, and for those of you who come into this conversation more recently, 2012 was really the year that really MOOCs blast onto the scene. The New York Times had proclaimed 2012 the year of the MOOC, and it was all the rage. By 2013, MOOCs had become really a worldwide phenomenon. And if you reflect back on that time, there was very much an open education resources conversation going on, and we were all kind of marveling at the idea of a single professor teaching hundreds of thousands of people around the world through an open course. We had universities sharing all of their courseware free through platforms as well. But as time changed, and there's a lot of declarations of the disruption of higher education, and higher education was dead and the like. I think by the time we reached about 2015-16, we were at a lull in terms of sentiment. Of course, MOOCs were still growing, and we're going to see that really shortly. But there was a real, cynicism around the mission and around what had been achieved in the MOOC space as well. But meanwhile, and we'll see this soon, MOOCs were powering on. That conversation, that narrative that had been built was underneath being progressed. And by 2019, much to the surprise of a lot of people, MOOCs boasted, 30,000 courses, were already powering 50 degree programs and working with more than 1,000 universities around the world. And milestones like this really surprised a lot of people who were still back in 2015, 2016. And there was a lot of declarations of disruption back in 2012 and 2013 that perhaps rubbed some people the wrong way. And then along came 2020, and we'll see the impact of that shortly. 2021, the most fascinating development for the MOOC watchers has been Coursera filing for IPO, and a treasure trove of data that has accompanied that filing, and seeing a whole new chapter develop out of the MOOC phenomena. We thought we'd just do a really quick case study here. I just wanted to drill into Udemy, who some folks will immediately say that's not a MOOC. And towards the end, you're going to see this messy landscape, and we're going to unpack it a little bit. But there are a whole bunch of folks, especially back in 2011, who said that Udemy was a MOOC. We traced back all of Udemy's mission statements and statements it was using on its website all the way back to 2011. And in 2011, Udemy was a website that enabled anyone to create an online course. Its goal was to provide teachers with everything they could possibly need to create a learning experience over the internet. And they said everything is completely free. By 2012, their goal was to disrupt and to democratize education by enabling anyone to learn from the world's experts. And if you match this kind of commentary to that chart, you'll see that same narrative that was playing out in the media through time. 2013, it was about passionate instructors who were building their brand and making money by teaching on Udemy. Until today, we're starting to see, Udemy position itself as the leading global marketplace for learning and instruction. So like a fascinating, very quick case study, mapping the narrative, what started back at the beginning of the last decade through to where we are today. More recently, on the right-hand side here, you can see what we call our digital reach indices. These trace the website traffic and digital reach of platforms in categories from our global learning landscape. And that blue line is tracing the collective change in the digital reach of MOOCs since the beginning of 2018 to January 2021. And on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, you can see that their digital reach increased fourfold. It was enormous. And that massive change through 2020 is COVID fueled, that change there. You can see some peer categories in that chart as well, OPMs, wellness, boot camps, and Q&A. From a relative perspective, MOOCs really separated from the pack. I mean, the growth that those other categories experienced was incredible in its own right, but the growth in the MOOC platforms was just, nearly unbelievable about what we were seeing unfold there. This is a snapshot from our platform. What we're looking at here, each one of these circles is a MOOC. There's 142 MOOCs here we've captured on the platform. The size of the circle is showing the digital reach or the website traffic of that MOOC. The blue circles are all representing MOOCs that are headquartered or were founded and started and are led out of North America. The green, Europe. East Asia and the Pacific is really underrepresented here compared to what we see in real life. China, quite specifically, is a very mobile, WeChat-oriented economy, also very hard to get good data out of that market comparable to North America quite specifically. And many of the others, quite interestingly, are government-led or they are multinational-led platforms, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But again, an amazing collection of platforms that have grown really rapidly through this period. What's on MOOCs? Well, you should really take a closer look. It keeps surprising me every time I look back at the kind of diversity of courses that are being hosted on MOOCs, from free to paid to degrees. You can see on the left-hand side is a lot of programs on humanities. Technology and business, perhaps we're more familiar with, specifically in the commercial space. There's a lot of what I read and think of as academic support around science, engineering, and mathematics. There's a lot of material around education and helping teachers learn new ways and discover new ways of teaching, and a lot of professional development as well. The healthcare market has turned to MOOCs to share a lot of general academic research related education on healthcare, but also quite practical components as well. And then there's a creative economy and personal development, which is quite significant on MOOC platforms as well. A really quick case study on Coursera. I'd mentioned that Coursera had filed for IPO quite recently, and I can see as many good friends and customers and colleagues who are here who probably spent the weekend after this was released printing this out and reading it from top to bottom. But for those of you who didn't get the opportunity, and just to kind of pause here and reflect, on the left-hand side, not all of this was unknown prior to the release, but Coursera is boasting nearly 80 million registered learners now, and that's just an incredible number. Paid learners, however, through 2020 were 3.2 million users who paid for a course on Coursera. Coursera has started a subscription model as well, a pretty typical model of an annual subscription to a whole bunch of material, and there's 50,000 paid members of that subscription. And then finally, Coursera, as you'll see very shortly, has also been powering degree programs over the last few years, and throughout 2020 was supporting nearly 12,000 learners through degree programs for its university partners as well. That's about the size of, depending on which country you're in, a medium to large university in its own right. On the right-hand side are the financials, looking at the money side. So Coursera think of their business on three lines: the consumer, the enterprise, and the degree market. And those bars are tracing from 2017, 18, 19, and 20. So you can see the consumer business there is enormous and really, really shot up through COVID. Enterprise has been growing very strongly over time, as has the degree segment, which has been doubling every year as well. So very significant organization, very significant footprint, perhaps not what some think of when we say the word MOOC. And on that note, I think I'm going to pass over to you, Maria.
Hi everyone, it's great to see you here. Lots of people from all over the world. It's wonderful to see. And for those of you who are joining on recording, welcome. This part of the presentation is just looking a little bit more at zooming out on MOOCs in their context, and then we'll dive into MOOC models. But let's talk first about MOOCs in their context, because MOOCs have been around for nearly 10 years or 10 years, and lots of people still have the original ideas of MOOCs are still stuck in their head. So let's just start very quickly to jump into this topic on a quick poll. Which category do you most associate with the term MOOCs? Open education resources, online courses and badges, micro-credentials and certifications, or university qualifications? Just what's the first thing really when someone says MOOC to you? Which of those categories comes to mind? I can see in the poll there's a 42, 46, 50% online courses and badges. Fair enough. Micro-credentials and certifications. Open education resources. We're sort of tracking like for like here. Well, half of you think online courses and badges, 30% or so open education resources. That's interesting. And 30% around micro-credentials. And so this in itself is interesting. MOOCs already have a broad definition, and people think of them in different ways, fulfilling different objectives. And so what we're going to do now is just zoom out a little bit and have a look at MOOCs in their context. And so for those of you who joined us a couple of weeks ago where we deep dived into micro-credentials and alternative credentials, what we did there was say, well, in addition to the formal degrees, bundled degrees, associate degrees, bachelor's degrees and masters, typically, where do micro-credentials sit? And MOOCs also sit within this frame. And you can see that MOOC platforms such as FutureLearn or edX or Coursera, you can see them here on this slide. They play a part within this somewhat messy landscape of micro credentials, from really small, a few hour learning objects right through to sort of much larger specializations, which sometimes and perhaps increasingly are given credit into more formal or into other qualifications. So MOOCs, MOOC models, MOOC courses sit within this micro-credentialing landscape. And when same segment here, short courses and badges, sort of boot camps, professional licenses, non-university issued non-degree certificates, university issued non-degree certificates, and then the whole accredited space. MOOCs really did start, and given the numbers that we just saw from, one example of Coursera, the short courses and badges, and I think 50% of you said, yeah, short courses and badges. This is the origin of the MOOC. They're playing in this space, delivering short courses, sometimes badged, often badged. However, MOOCs are now moving across, and have been for quite some time, into other parts of this micro-credential or credentialing market. And so MOOCs absolutely play in the non-university issued non-degree certificates. And that is MOOCs not just doing little short courses, but MOOCs saying, actually, if you pull a few of these things together, we can give you a certificate at like specializations or tracks. And so that's definitely part of where MOOCs are heading, and have been for a while. And we could see that in some of those stats from Coursera as an example. And then university issued non-degree certificates. I mean, this is also sort of core business for MOOCs, and that is partnering with universities to support their non-degree or non-accredited courses. Often they are the vehicle that many universities, thousands actually of universities, partner with MOOCs for this particular purpose. And more recently, but still not just this year, but over a number of years, MOOC platforms have been partnering with universities to support their full degree programs. And this is an interesting move. They're sort of moving into that OPM space. In terms of size of these markets, so when we pulled apart the micro-credential market, we see the sort of different sizes of these things. Online degree, boot camps, of course, is a very specific model. Online non-degree certificates and post-secondary micro-credentials, that's a university and non-university delivered. MOOCs are absolutely playing in this space, partnering with universities or others as a B2B partner. And that's a $2.3 billion market. And of course, the online short courses and badges, that's their original sort of area. And again, we're estimating this is a $3.8 billion market. That's the direct-to-consumer market for MOOCs, also very big. And one other thing to talk about here is that MOOCs also operate in the test prep for these professional certifications, not the certifications themselves and the test, but certainly in test prep. So actually MOOC providers are operating across this whole spectrum. And then not only that, let's not forget, I guess, that the online degree market is growing, and MOOC models, MOOC platforms are partnering with universities to deliver full degree programs. And so when you think of MOOCs, we need to start thinking across all those different spectrums, from very short course micro right through to full degree programs, either directly or in partnership. So this is sort of the context in which the MOOC model sits. And now let's think a little bit more about lifting the lid, lifting the hood, I guess, on MOOCs or a MOOC model. What is that really? I mean, even the whole term MOOC, they're doing so many different things, and it's really it's the online course platform space. MOOCs sit within that, but how could you unpack that? And we started to think about this in terms of content strategy, the sort of dimensions you can think about online course platforms, including MOOCs, their content strategy. Who creates the content? Who builds it? The distribution strategy. Is it a single brand? Is it a multi-brand catalog? How is the delivery, or how is the distribution managed? Of course, channel strategies and commercial models, there's different elements to that as well. So we started to think about online course platforms, including MOOCs, along these dimensions. The two main dimensions that we started looking at really were content and distribution. So, when you add those things together and start thinking about different dimensions on content and strategy. So for content strategy, there's an individual content strategy. the individual person or expert builds and creates content, or there's an institutional approach to content strategy on the other hand. And in terms of the distribution, is distribution through a single brand, and that is, the content author building and selling, essentially distributing their course or their content or their program under a single brand, or is there a multi-brand sort of shopfront or multi-brand catalogue of different authors, different institutions? So when you start to cut online course models in these two dimensions, what we see is something like this. We're going to pause on this for a minute, but essentially those two dimensions, content strategy on the left-hand side and distribution strategy across the top there, when you pull those apart, we do different models unfold. Patrick's going to start unpacking those models.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Maybe just a little bit of context before I dive into each one. And as Maria said, I know personally I'm incredibly dissatisfied with the label MOOC. As somebody who builds taxonomies and does analysis day in and day out, it's really not capturing the dimensions on which we're seeing the market strategically unfold. The other kind of heads up I wanted to share with everyone is you are all going to participate in 3 very important strategy questions about these 4 categories in about 10 minutes. So please dial in and please participate in these strategy questions that we're going to share with you shortly. So let's look at each of these 4 quadrants. On the top left is what we call maker. So as Maria had mentioned, on a content strategy perspective, whether you're the platform or the individual, they've decided that this expert, this peer-to-peer learning and teaching model is going to seek a platform that champions them as a brand, so that they have a single brand shopfront, so that when learners seek out their mentoring and instruction, they're doing so from that one brand, which for the most part is an individual, sometimes is a small to medium business, sometimes it's a large business taking advantage of just incredible tools as well. And you saw on the previous slide, this is folks like Teachable, folks like Thinkific, who are essentially powering those individual content authors and experts to distribute their learning and to reach learners around the world. And what's happening though is sometimes those platforms, they want to be a marketplace. They know that they could potentially power their customers with more distribution by using the power of their reach overall. That takes us to the marketplace. And now we're thinking of folks like Udemy, like Pluralsight, and we'll go into the definitions here. So essentially, this is still on the content side, a collection of individual authors or experts who are looking to share their knowledge and to upskill folks around the world. But they're doing so through a marketplace, which is essentially a multi-brand catalog. It's a marketplace bringing together a whole bunch of learners with a whole bunch of teachers and trainers and instructors from around the world. And so Udemy is perhaps the most well-known of these marketplaces, bringing both of those sides together. What's fascinating, however, and you can see this in Udemy's commercials, is when an instructor brings learners to Udemy for their own course, they take a 97% revenue share. That is, the instructor takes a 97% revenue share. They take the lion's share, and Udemy kind of just acts as charging a small commission for the platform. But when Udemy brings the audience, that revenue share goes way down, sometimes down to 25%, even lower. So there's a real split of this economic model between the instructor and the marketplace based on there. And as a consequence, when an instructor becomes very well known and very well regarded, the economics often mean that they'll move back to the makerspace. Then we start to look at, from a content strategy perspective, this institutional market. And so let's think of universities. That's the easiest in the most part, but actually often many times it's folks like Oracle have a large footprint to train people in all of their products and systems and tools and techniques as well. But universities, definitely from a MOOC perspective, is the easiest to think. So universities here from an online learning perspective, sometimes the decision is DIY. And for the most part, that means a learning management system. For the most part, that means coming up with a digital strategy that's about powering the institution to deliver, to build, to distribute, to facilitate online learning through a do-it-yourself model, if you like. And then finally, we get to MOOCs. Again, we were so dissatisfied with the label. It's really struggling to be a great label for describing this place. I don't think the MOOCs call themselves MOOCs anymore either, by the way. And so from an analytic perspective, we're still from a content strategy looking for the most part at universities and enterprises increasingly as well. But again, it is a multi-brand catalog in how a MOOC goes to market. When I go to FutureLearn or edX or Coursera or SWIAM or EdRack or whatever the MOOC platform I'm in around the world, I'm going to find lots of different university courses on that platform. The MOOC definitely, for the most part, controls which institutions are allowed to publish and share content and learn and teach on that platform as well. And so we started this journey trying to really unpack what is a MOOC after all these years and after all this evolution, and on what dimensions could we better frame what's happening in this market as well. And so with that background, we're going to hold what I think is probably the world's first massive open online board meeting to vote and to crowdsource the amazing expertise that is on this webinar. We have hundreds of professionals. I can see in the registrations, CEOs, senior executives from the world's largest MOOCs, universities, you name it, OPMs. We have an incredible audience here. And so we've formed an impromptu massive open online board meeting to really understand collectively together how you're thinking about these four spaces. So the first question, and I'll pose the poll very shortly, is of these four models for online courses, online course platforms, the maker model, empowering individual authors, trainers, teachers, the marketplace, bringing many teachers and together with a marketplace, DIY, so for the most part, learning management systems powering universities to do it themselves, or the MOOC, who, as we've seen, is a very diverse footprint. But if we had to really nail it down, it's about bringing institutional content from many institutions to many people through a multi-brand platform as well. So this first question, you're putting on your professor, analytical, strategy, board hat on. And the first question is, which of these four models, as you look forward to the future of higher education today, do you think is the most vulnerable or has the weakest position? This is not to say that they're not all actually very strong in their own right, but from a relative perspective, which one do you feel is the most vulnerable? Again, they may all be very strong, but which one of these do you think is the most vulnerable? We're sharing the poll now. Please participate in the world's first massive open online board meeting. It looks like LMS is really taking the lead. 58%, 59%, 60% of respondents so far have picked the LMS. The maker model, about a quarter of the board think the maker is the most vulnerable. There's still nearly 10% who have picked the MOOC, and really interestingly, marketplace is very low. There is still a small segment, about 6% of this massive open online board, that feel as though marketplace is the most vulnerable. But LMS, 60% of this impromptu board meeting have decided that the LMS is the most vulnerable and the weakest position. Again, reiterating, It doesn't mean they're not strong and growing really fast, but from a relative perspective, thinking of these four, they're the most vulnerable. So let's look on the bright side. So now, again, collectively, which of these models, segments, from a relative perspective, have the brightest future or the strongest position? I'm going to share this poll now. So again, we're not saying that they don't all have a bright future or they're not all in a fantastic position. The question is, which has the brightest future or the strongest position? We're seeing a bit of an inverse of the last question, which makes sense. So 50%, it's really interesting though, Marketplace and MOOC are very close. Nearly 45% each. Very low response for Maker, really low response for LMS. It's neck and neck now. Marketplace and MOOC are 45, 46%. Again, fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. So one final question. This is a hard one. So now a final question as we think about what's next for MOOCs. Our final question is for all of the MOOCs to think about, if you were a MOOC, where would you be placing your energy? Where would you be placing your bets? Where would you be thinking the brightest future for you as an organization sits? And you've got a lot of choices, so I'm just going to explain these before I share the poll as well. So top left is to position yourself to power sharing, to be the network, for higher education to enter the sharing economy, to be the courseware and the platform that powers the sharing of courseware and curriculum globally around the world, and to bring that together. That would be where you would focus. You're only allowed to choose one. The second would be to say, you know what, the future is in degrees. We started in courses and badges. We worked our way up to micro credentials. We've definitely entered the degree market. That's where we're headed. We're just going to continue that trajectory. Courseware will be the base. Degrees will be the future. That's what our power degree strategy represents. Power unbundling is essentially a micro credential unbundling of higher education, and MOOCs are the driving force. You've decided as an organization that you will be the driving force that powers the unbundling of higher education. It will no longer be big, expensive blocks. It will be unbundled. It will be cheaper. It will be faster. And you will be the platform that powers that transition in higher education. This other green option is actually to go for enterprise. You've decided that higher education is doing well, but the future lies in the future of work, and specifically powering upskilling in enterprise. You saw how fast Coursera's enterprise business was growing as well. You've decided, actually, universities are doing fine. We're going to focus on enterprise for the next 5 to 10 years. As if that wasn't a lot of options, you've got a couple of step out options as well. One step out option we thought we'd include just for creativity is to say, you know what, as a consequence of having somewhere between 100 and 500 million learners, we actually have the deepest amount of data on talent. And we're going to focus on hiring. We're going to help learners and enterprises around the world match. And what better way to do that than to be the platform that was part of that upskilling experience to evaluate learners, to help them to match with employers as well. And the last strategy is back to the core. You've decided, I don't want to do any of those fancy things. We're just going to do much, much better at what we do today. And we're just going to focus on the core. So I'm going to share this poll now. You only get to pick one. I know you want to pick a few. I know you can do a few, but you only get to pick one. You have to place your bets and all of your energy as an organization, as a MOOC, for a really bright future. Where are you going to position yourself? So fascinating early move out of the gates. Unbundling is at about 40%. Hiring and talent, which was our creative adjacency, is at 20%. Powering enterprise is at 16%. Becoming the sharing platform or network is at about 10%. Degrees is at about 10%. And this board meeting has decided that business as usual is not going to cut it. We're going to have to do something much more interesting. So the numbers keep rolling in. It's really not changing significantly. Unbundling is by far the dominant strategy. So this massive open online board meeting will be pursuing an unbundling strategy from here on. 40%. Powering hiring and talent, which is a fascinating response, 25%, 24%. Powering enterprise is in at 14%. Powering sharing network and degrees has come in at under 10%. And operational improvement, steady as she goes, business as usual, is at 5%. Wow, fascinating outcome. On that note, Beth, over to you.
Amazing. I'm sure the sound of a spontaneous board meeting doesn't make anyone too excited, but everyone did a great job. And I hope we're trademarking MOOC, by the way.
Right.
Amazing. Oh, did we do this?
Oh, we did that.
Okay, great. Cool. Amazing. So some quick next steps. We're just at the 45-minute mark. Everyone, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for all your insights and reflections and questions and feedback and everything. Excellent board. And I hope to see you at the next session. The next thing we really hope everybody does as soon as they jump off of this webinar is join our Higher Education Global Network. It's an amazing way to stay up to date with all the things we're doing through this initiative. You can fill out the self-assessment. Just follow that, which is a really great way to just track where you're standing and what you're thinking about and how that fits more broadly with others in the space. You'll also get lots of other great information like invites to future events and updates on research. So it's just a really great thing to be part of. We'll follow up with more information about that as well. And the link is right there. Thanks again, Patrick, Lucy, Maria. Thank you so much. It was enlightening as always. And can't wait for the next one in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.